I sacrificed everything to save my parents from financial ruin, only to be told I was never part of their family. I stepped into the living room, the familiar scent of polished wood and old leather greeting me, but it brought no comfort. The soft hum of the grandfather clock sounded like the quiet countdown to something I didn't want to face. My mother sat stiffly on the cream sofa, her posture perfect, her face unreadable. My father leaned against the fireplace, arms crossed, eyes that refused to meet mine. Lydia lounged in the armchair, smirking as though she had just won some invisible prize. "Alina," my mother began, her voice cold and even, "we know what you did. We know you covered our medical bills, that you saved us from bankruptcy. $500,000? Is that correct?" I nodded, unsure if I should feel proud, shocked, or something else entirely. My hands clenched at my sides. I thought they would be grateful. I thought this would bring relief, maybe even tears. Dad finally looked at me, his eyes sharp and disapproving. "You did this, and yet, you're still not part of this family. You never have been. You don't belong here, Alina." I froze. Every breath caught somewhere between disbelief and pain. I wanted to speak, to explain, to scream, but the words lodged in my throat. Was this really happening? After everything, this is how they repay me? Lydia leaned forward, her smirk sharpening. "Exactly. Always making it about what you can do for us. Always throwing your help in our faces. You think your money makes you better than us." My stomach sank. I had driven 4 hours through relentless rain to have this conversation. I had imagined something else entirely. Gratitude, maybe even a hesitant apology. Instead, the room was thick with cold judgment, the silence broken only by the steady tick of the grandfather clock. How could they not see all I had given? I remembered the nights I spent signing paperwork, negotiating with the hospital, taking out loans I would be paying off for years, sacrificing my sleep, my weekends, my life. Every effort, every penny, meant to save them. And now they looked at me as if I were the problem. My voice barely above a whisper, I asked, Why now?" Mom's jaw tightened, her eyes glinting with a strange, unreadable resolve. "It isn't sudden, Alina. We've been discussing this for months. While you were busy saving us, we realized you don't belong here. You never really did." I felt my knees weaken. The betrayal sank deep, a cold, jagged weight in my chest. My own family, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, were telling me I was nothing to them. And in that moment, I understood, no amount of money, no act of loyalty, could buy a place in a heart that had already decided I didn't belong. I turned my eyes toward the window, watching raindrops race each other down the glass, wondering silently if love had ever been real. Maybe I had been holding on to a dream that never existed. The grandfather clock continued ticking, indifferent to my pain, indifferent to the life I had given for a family that no longer saw me. And yet, as devastating as it felt, a quiet realization began to form. Sometimes, the hardest truths are the ones that finally set you free. As I sat alone later that night, memories began to surface like fragile shards of glass. I remembered Lydia's laughter echoing through the house as she tore open birthday presents while I watched, my hands empty except for a small card with $20 tucked inside. I had smiled, of course, because smiling was easier than crying. My parents had said, "You're so independent, Alina," as though independence could replace the warmth they gave my sister so freely. It wasn't just birthdays. It was everything. Family vacations planned around Lydia's school schedule, new clothes for her while I wore hand-me-downs, college funds that seemed to flow toward her but barely trickled toward me. Each instance was small alone, almost dismissible, but together, they formed a pattern, a quiet, persistent message. You are not the favorite, and you never will be. I remember the day I got a scholarship to college. I had expected pride, maybe even a hug. Instead, Mom clapped politely, her smile tight. "We always knew you were smart," she said. And that was it. Was this really all the love I could ever earn? Even simple moments were weighted with comparison. Dinner conversations were peppered with praise for Lydia, while my achievements were barely acknowledged. I had learned to shrink, to make myself small, to avoid notice. and I became very good at it. Independence wasn't freedom. It was a shield, a way to survive in a house where love came with limits and favoritism ruled quietly but absolutely. I remember being 12, staring at Lydia's shiny new bike while I received only a small token. I had tried to be happy for her, to convince myself it didn't matter. Yet even then, I knew the difference. I knew what it felt like to be the other child, the one who mattered less, the one whose successes were quietly noted but never celebrated. And still, I thrived. I learned early that I could not rely on anyone else for validation, for affection, or for support. I became resourceful, determined, ambitious, but always with the undercurrent of loneliness, the subtle ache of wanting something I was never given freely. Why does love sometimes feel conditional, as if it has a price tag attached? That question lingered in the quiet of my apartment, unanswered, yet shaping every choice I made from that moment forward. Through it all, I understood one truth. Survival often demands that you become everything for yourself, even when those who should care the most do not. I had to be my own hero long before I realized it. From the outside, my life looked perfect. A scholarship to a good college, straight A's, internships that led to full-time positions. Success was stitched into every part of my story. Promotions came faster than I expected. My bank account grew steadily, and I built a career that many envied. Yet, behind every achievement was a quiet room, an empty seat at the table, and the persistent echo of, "You're so independent, Alina." I had learned early that I could not rely on anyone else for help. College applications, scholarship forms, essays, late-night study sessions, everything was done alone. My parents never attended award ceremonies, never called to ask how I was doing, never celebrated the milestones that mattered to me. Lydia, of course, was showered with attention and praise for her smaller accomplishments. And I learned to smile politely, to nod, to accept that love in my family was measured and selective. The hours at work became my new proving ground. I threw myself into projects, meetings, and long nights at the office. My career wasn't just a job. It was validation, a way to show that I could succeed even when no one at home believed I could. Yet each promotion, each accolade, felt strangely hollow. Why does achievement feel meaningless when it isn't recognized by the people who should matter most? There were moments I caught glimpses of what I wanted. A congratulatory word from Mom, a proud glance from Dad, a sister who didn't resent me. But those moments never came. I learned to be proud quietly, to treasure small victories in secret, to let my work be the only witness to my effort. Independence became my identity not because I loved it, but because it was necessary. I remember sitting in my first office alone, looking out the window at the city skyline, feeling the weight of accomplishment heavy in my chest. I had achieved everything on paper: a career, financial stability, freedom. Yet, the emptiness lingered because the one recognition I craved, acceptance from my family, remained unattainable. And still I persevered, because I realized that life rarely gives you everything you want, especially not love and support together with success. Sometimes you have to claim one, even if the other is denied. And in that choice, I found a certain quiet pride, the kind that no one could take from me. Could a person ever truly feel complete when their successes are invisible to those who shape them? I learned to answer that question within myself, not in their eyes. It started with a phone call that shattered the quiet of my evening. Lydia's voice was frantic, almost trembling. "Alina, Mom, Dad, they're gonna lose everything. The bills, the house, the treatments. I don't know what to do." Her words were a torrent, pouring out fear and desperation. I gripped the phone tighter, trying to steady my racing heart. In that moment, I understood the gravity of the situation. Dad had suffered a heart attack last year. Mom's cancer treatments had drained every savings account, and the mountain of medical bills loomed impossibly high. Bankruptcy wasn't a distant threat anymore. It was real, immediate, and crushing. How could this happen so fast, after everything we'd worked for separately? Without hesitation, I offered to help. Not because I expected gratitude, but because someone had to act. I spent nights sorting through bills, loans, and insurance claims. I negotiated with hospital administrators, coordinated with nonprofit assistance programs, and even dipped into my own savings to prevent them from losing their home. Every document I signed, every check I wrote, was a lifeline I threw into a storm that seemed determined to drag them under. I remember driving to the hospital that first day, rain blurring the windshield, hands trembling on the wheel. Each step in the paperwork, each conversation with the billing department, was like walking a tightrope over a canyon of debt. I became their advocate, their shield, the one who refused to let their lives crumble. I thought of all the sacrifices it would take. Loans I would carry for years, my own retirement funds partially liquidated, weekends spent filling forms instead of resting, vacations canceled. Yet, even as exhaustion pressed down, I pressed on. Because if I didn't, no one else would. Lydia's relief was immediate, almost overwhelming. "I don't know how to thank you," she said between sobs. But her gratitude was small comfort compared to the crushing realization. I was the only one standing between them and disaster. Every dollar, every signature, every late-night phone call reinforced a truth I had long suspected: blood alone does not guarantee loyalty. And yet, despite the emotional weight, there was a strange clarity in that storm. I had the power to protect, to act decisively, to prevent ruin. And I did it. Not for recognition, not for love, but because it was right. As I finally sat back, exhausted and drained, I thought quietly, this is what it means to be the responsible one. The only one who sees clearly, the one they might never appreciate. The crisis would eventually pass, but the memory of those sleepless nights and relentless responsibility would stay with me forever. I had saved them financially, but I could not save the fragile bonds of love that should have been there. The days blurred together, each one filled with numbers, forms, and phone calls that never seemed to end. I sold what I had saved for years, my emergency funds, part of my retirement, money I had tucked away for the quiet security of my own future. Every check I wrote felt heavy in my hands, a tangible weight of responsibility I could not escape. The bills were relentless, multiplying faster than I could track, and the thought of letting my parents lose their home or treatment was unbearable. Negotiating with the hospitals became a full-time job in itself. I spent hours on the phone, pleading for payment plans, explaining circumstances, proving hardship over and over. Each conversation was a delicate dance between compassion and bureaucracy, between hope and despair. I filled out forms with meticulous care, double-checking every line, every signature, knowing that a single mistake could cost them everything. How much can one person shoulder before it breaks them? When I discovered a charitable reclassification program that could forgive most of the debt, relief flashed through me, but it was only temporary. The paperwork was exhausting, the documentation endless, and the waiting periods torturous. I became a silent force behind their survival, a shadow moving through hospital corridors and office spaces, unseen, unpraised, but indispensable. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, calculating the cost to my own life, financially, emotionally, physically. Every hour spent on their bills was an hour stolen from my own rest, my own career, my own personal dreams. The sacrifices mounted silently, the toll invisible to anyone but me. I was alone in carrying the weight of their lives, and the knowledge that it was never going to buy me their love or gratitude gnawed quietly at my resolve. I remember walking into my apartment one evening, empty boxes from sold possessions stacked neatly in the corner, and collapsing onto the sofa. My hands were sore from signing documents, my eyes dry from endless hours of stress, yet my mind raced with calculations, deadlines, and contingency plans. I realized I had become more than just a daughter. I had become their financial architect, their crisis manager, their invisible lifeline. And through it all, the truth settled deep inside me. Love and family are not always earned through sacrifice, and sometimes the very act of saving those you care about comes at a cost they may never acknowledge. I had given everything I could, and yet the heart I hoped to win remained untouched. Even so, I pressed on because if I faltered, the consequences would have been catastrophic. My life had intertwined with theirs in a way that left no room for hesitation, only relentless, exhausting responsibility. I walked into the living room, hands trembling, as if the weight of the past months had finally settled onto my shoulders. My parents sat there, faces cold and unreadable. Mom's lips were pressed into a thin line, Dad's arms were crossed, and Lydia lounged in the armchair like she had already won some invisible prize. I had expected gratitude, or at least relief, but the words that came out of their mouths shattered every expectation I had held. "We appreciate what you did, Alina," Mom said, her voice flat and even. "The medical bills, the bankruptcy thing, that was generous. Generous." The word hung in the air like a bitter perfume, twisting everything I had done into something transactional. My breath caught. After 6 months of exhausting work, sacrifices I couldn't even begin to explain, I had saved them, and they still refused to see me as their daughter. Dad finally looked at me, his eyes sharp with accusation. "You've never really fit into this family. Your choices, your lifestyle, the way you act like you're better than us. Better than you. I had just saved your house." I wanted to shout, "Do they even see what I risked?" But my voice caught in my throat. Lydia smirked, leaning forward in her chair. "Exactly. Always throwing things in our faces. Always making everything about money." I had driven hours through rain, imagining a conversation filled with tears of relief, not this cold dismissal. And now, standing in their living room, I realized the truth I had long suspected. I had never mattered, not really. Mom's words cut deeper than any accusation of arrogance. "We're cutting ties, Alina. You're not part of this family anymore." The grandfather clock ticked in the silence, each second pounding against my chest like a drum. Outside, children laughed. Inside, something fundamental had shattered. Every memory of childhood flickered before me. Birthdays where Lydia got parties and I got a card. Achievements minimized. Love dispensed unevenly. Every sacrifice I had made, every sleepless night, every dollar spent to save them, none of it mattered. I had been invisible even in their gratitude. I swallowed the lump in my throat and tried to understand. Why now? After everything, after all the nights I had spent untangling their financial mess, why was I being pushed away? Lydia's smug gaze was the final insult. She had always been the favored one, and now she stood firmly, supported by the very parents I had saved. The irony burned hotter than anger. I had done everything for them, relentlessly, tirelessly, without expectation. And still they turned their backs. Some people are incapable of seeing the truth until it is too late. I took a deep breath, feeling the hollow ache where my family should have been. I realized then that love, when conditional and blind to sacrifice, is a luxury some will never offer. And for my own survival, I had to accept it. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, the unfamiliar number flashing across the screen. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I wanted to pick up, and then I did. "Alina, it's Aunt Carol," came the warm, gentle voice that always made me feel seen, even as a child. I exhaled, relief and caution tangled together. Tears threatened to spill as I told her everything. How Mom and Dad had disowned me after I saved them, how Lydia had tried to manipulate the hospital, and how I was left carrying the emotional and financial burden alone. I spoke quickly, voice trembling, trying to fit months of hurt into a single conversation. Aunt Carol listened without interruption, her silence steady and comforting, like the ground beneath me. When I finished, she sighed, and the sound carried years of knowing. "Alina, honey, I've watched this your whole life. Your mama and daddy did you wrong. But maybe this is the freedom you needed." Her words hit like a splash of cold water, truth so clear it hurt to acknowledge. Freedom. Could it really feel like this after betrayal? She went on, recounting details I had suspected but never fully confirmed. The favoritism toward Lydia, the times I had been subtly excluded, the small acts of sabotage disguised as family concern. She told me about the $20,000 Dad borrowed 3 years ago for home repairs, which I had never known about, only to see Lydia wearing a new diamond bracelet the next month. She reminded me of Christmases I was told I was too busy to attend, when in reality, I had been deliberately uninvited. Each revelation was a key, unlocking memories I had buried and tried to rationalize away. "Alina," Aunt Carol said softly, "they've been rewriting history for years. making you the villain so they could feel like the victims. It's not your fault. I closed my eyes, the weight of disbelief and relief mixing together. Could the truth really be this stark after all those years? Her words validated the deep ache I had carried alone. The manipulations, the jealousy, the emotional neglect, they were not imagined. I hadn't been overreacting. I hadn't been imagining slights or inventing grievances. I had been living in the shadow of lies, believing them to be truth. For the first time, clarity cut through the fog of hurt. I understood that the disapproval, the coldness, the constant undermining, it was never about me personally failing. It had always been about control, jealousy, and their inability to love freely. I felt a strange, bittersweet relief. Knowing the truth didn't erase the pain, but it gave me the power to stop blaming myself for the cruelty I had endured. Aunt Carol's final words lingered long after the call ended. You have a choice now, Alina. The past cannot be changed, but you can decide who you allow in your life and how you protect your heart. I sat at my desk, the city lights outside my window casting long reflections across my paperwork-strewn apartment. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Lydia, insisting I had made errors in the hospital forms, that I had exaggerated their financial hardship. Fury bubbled beneath my skin, but I breathed deeply, forcing myself to think clearly. Could someone really be so blind to the truth and so determined to hurt me? I pulled out the carefully organized folder I had kept for months. Bank statements, medical bills, correspondence with the hospital, every signed form, every proof of my parents' true circumstances at the time of the charitable classification. I had known this day could come, the moment when someone would try to rewrite the story and pin blame on me. Now it had arrived. I called Miranda Wilson, the attorney who had helped me with estate planning. Her voice was calm, professional, but tinged with concern as I explained the situation. Lydia's manipulation went beyond insults. It was a calculated attempt to reclaim the forgiven debt for her business gain, and she had framed me as the supposed architect of fraud. Miranda listened intently, then laid out the steps clearly. We could legally and ethically challenge the charitable classification based on the fact that my parents were now leveraging their assets for profit, not survival. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders once more. Filing the legal paperwork would not be easy, and the process would be public enough to stir whispers in the family. But I knew I could not remain silent. Silence would mean complicity. If I did nothing, would I be protecting them or myself? Over the next few days, I meticulously compiled every document, highlighted every factual detail, and worked with Miranda to craft a submission that was both precise and indisputable. When the paperwork was sent, a strange emptiness filled me, like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing the fall would change everything. The hospital opened a formal review, and I waited, heart pounding, knowing that when the decision came, the consequences would be real and inescapable. I imagined my parents receiving the notice, seeing the debt restored in full, penalties included. I did not feel triumph. I felt only a quiet, necessary clarity. They had treated me as expendable, disregarded my sacrifices, and allowed jealousy and entitlement to dictate their choices. The consequences were not revenge. They were the inevitable result of ignoring responsibility and truth. Sitting back in my chair, I allowed myself a deep breath. This was not a moment for anger, nor for gloating. It was a declaration. I would no longer be the invisible shield for people unwilling to recognize my worth. The financial and emotional burden had been mine to bear for long enough. The phone rang incessantly, messages piled up, and my inbox flooded with accusations from the people I had once called family. Dad's voice, raw and broken, trembled through the receiver. You destroyed us. How could you do this? Each word struck like a hammer against my chest, and for a fleeting moment, I questioned myself. Did I go too far? But the memory of their cold eyes, the dismissal of my sacrifices, the smirk Lydia wore as they cut me out, steadied me. I remembered the nights I spent calculating how to save them from bankruptcy, the calls to hospitals, the paperwork I signed, the nights I cried alone while making sure they would survive financially. And still, they had made me the villain. Messages from Lydia poured in too. Angry, bitter, accusing me of ego, of being selfish, of killing the family over money. Her words burned, but beneath the surface I saw desperation. She was scrambling, facing the consequences of her own choices, now entwined with the truth I had revealed. I closed my eyes and let the sorrow wash over me. Grief for the family I thought I had, and sorrow for the love I never truly received. I thought about the years of being invisible, the birthdays that went unnoticed, the achievements that were minimized, the sacrifices I had made without expectation of reward. The weight of that grief settled heavy in my chest, but so did a strange, grounding clarity. I was not responsible for their choices, only for mine. I allowed myself to feel guilt, yes, but only for the human part of me that had hoped they would change, that had hoped my love and effort might earn recognition. The truth was undeniable. I had done everything within my power to help them, yet they rejected me. Standing firm in that realization became my anchor. Even as news of the reinstated debt spread through the family, I refused to engage with the anger and blame. I would not allow their attempts at control and manipulation to shake the life I had built. Tears flowed freely, but they were mine. Grief untainted by shame, sorrow unbroken by guilt. In the quiet that followed, I understood something profound. Love cannot be demanded. Sacrifices cannot always be recognized. And sometimes doing the right thing carries a personal cost. I would carry my integrity with me, even as the people I had loved most tried to tear it down. I sat at my small wooden desk, the soft evening light spilling across scattered photo albums and childhood mementos. My pen hovered over paper, hesitating. What do you say to people who have never truly seen you, who never valued your love, your sacrifices, or even your presence? How do you say goodbye to a family that never wanted you? Slowly, the words began to flow, unfiltered and honest. I wrote not to accuse, not to hurt, but to release the weight I had carried for 34 years. Dear Mom, Dad, and Lydia, I began. You'll never read this, but I need to write it, not for you, for me. To close a door I've been standing in for decades. I poured out my heart, forgiving them, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace. I forgave the birthdays forgotten, the accomplishments minimized, the conditional love that always came with strings. I forgave Lydia for being the favored child and wielding that position against me. I forgave my parents for seeing me as a disappointment when I had become everything they said I should be. Each line brought a lump to my throat, each sentence a release of a long-held ache. I carefully folded the letter and placed it in a box with photos, report cards, and baby shoes, the small tokens of a childhood I had loved, even when it wasn't returned. I knew this letter would never be sent. Its purpose was not reconciliation but liberation. I cannot change them. I can only change how I carry myself. Later, I drove to Aunt Carol's house and left the box with her. She held me close, her warmth a stark contrast to the cold I had felt for so long. You're going to be free, baby? She whispered, tears in her eyes. And for the first time, I let myself believe it. Freedom didn't mean revenge. It meant release. It meant living without the constant ache of unacknowledged love, without the fear of rejection from people who could never see my worth. As I drove home, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of ending and beginning. My phone buzzed with a message from someone I didn't know, a woman inspired by my story, leaving her own toxic family behind. My chest tightened, not from sadness, but from recognition. My pain, my journey, could help someone else survive, could turn heartbreak into hope. Sitting alone that evening in my apartment, finally a home rather than a hiding place, I realized something profound. I had spent my life trying to earn love that was never meant to be given freely. Now, I could build a life where I was enough simply because I existed. The grandfather clock in their living room may have stopped ticking years ago, but my life, my story, my time was just beginning.